So when we decided to call the series Save Me From My Cell Phone, it was just kind of obvious that we should hire Lenny to do the art for it because he loves horror films. How about you? Are you a horror film fan? Yeah, me, not so much. It's not a moral thing. I don't want it to be a judgmental thing. It's a Jaws thing. Like, I watched it when I was maybe 6 years old, and then I was at a friend's house, and he had cable, and we watched Jaws one night, and then next day I couldn't take a shower, and ever since then, open bodies of water I don't like, and that's not a joke. Because everywhere I go, you can just hear, when you get in water, you can just hear the sound, right? And so in that same time frame, I still don't love open water. I really didn't like it. My mom grew up on lakes. My sister was a lifeguard. I just loathed it. The Laurel swimming pool didn't even have heat in it, so it was usually 42 degrees, and they were telling you to jump in and have fun. And so I wasn't into any of that, but right around the same era, when I watched Jaws, I was taking swimming lessons. I remember my teacher's name was Mrs. Easton. She was a middle-aged woman with very short, curly, bleach blonde hair. And it was diving board day. And I was like, I'm not jumping off that, because when I jump off there's sharks down there. I'm not doing it. And so my parents bribed me with the circus. And then that wasn't enough. And then she upped the ante and she said, I'll tread water so that you jump in, and if there's any sharks, I'll protect you from the sharks. I mean, so I can't remember if I was like 6 or 16, but I still remember walking to the edge of the diving board, there's Mrs. Easton treading water, and all of a sudden I realized, to heck with jumping in front of her, I can reach her. So a couple bounces, and I just jumped right into her lap, except for when I landed, I left my mouth open and sunk my top teeth right into the top of her head. I can still remember the blood just pouring down her head. She got whisked away to urgent care, and I went to the circus. So actually worked out really well for me. So I'm not much into horror films, and I'm also not much into scare tactics when it comes to learning, especially when we connect learning to all things Jesus. And that's not because I don't think Jesus doesn't speak to the danger of total loss. I think that's definitely there, however it is you read that in terms of its bigger scope. But in general, and if you're not familiar with Narrate, I guess I'm a little insecure, because what I'd want you to know is our general MO would be one of invitation. And that's because when I open the Gospels, Gospel of Matthew, Gospel of Mark, Luke, John, in my opinion, Dallas Willard nails it when he translates or paraphrases the opening of the Gospel of Mark, when he just has Jesus saying, rethink your plans for living. There's a whole new set of possibilities out there. And that's generally the way we pursue God and life and relationship, is this invitational God. But I do think there's times where caution is maybe the higher form of valor. I think there's times where we do have reason to be afraid of things. And on this topic, this isn't going to be the temperature or the tone of the entire series, but I think if we're really going to dig into all things tech and iPhone, I think we've got to start from the danger side and ask these bigger questions, like maybe you're not hooked because you're lazy. And like maybe your kids aren't always staring at it because they're horrible people who live in this horrible generation. Like maybe we're hooked, quite frankly, because millions of dollars are spent getting it to that very place. And therefore the questions we have to ask is, what is the impact on creativity, on connection, on relationship? Like what's the bigger conversation we need to have? When I was 15, I got to play in my first Legion game. I grew up in Laurel. At the time, there were two Legion teams in Laurel, a AA and an A team. It was a good program. Fred Furbacher was the head coach. He was a railroader by day and a baseball coach by night, and that was very much the ilk of his program. I remember, first day of practice, he explained, and he was a big guy. He explained that if there was a bench clearing brawl and you beat him out of the dugout, you were off the team, or he beat you out of the dugout, you were off the team. He was the one who taught me, if someone squares to bunt, you don't want him to bunt, you throw at their head. He was the one that taught me that when you slide into second, you go cleats high. So it was that kind of a place. And we were competitive. In fact, my 15-year-old year, both the AA and A team qualified for the state tournament, and neither one of the Billings teams could boast as much as that. So it was a good tournament, or a good program. And so my first game, I was 15, I wasn't qualified, and my point in saying all that was our very first game as a program was against the Scarlets, which is a perennial favorite in state AA baseball. It was in Billings, and he told me I was suiting. And in hindsight, it wasn't because I was good enough to play, it was because he had that long view in mind. He was thinking about when I was 17 and 18, not when I was 15. And so there I was standing in the dugout at this epic field, Cobb Field. And you're going to think it's Kendrick. It's not. Cobb Field was the field in Billings where the Mustangs played. They had a very strong following even then. I grew up going to games there with my family. It was surreal to be in the dugout and then on the mound and then to watch my friend take a line drive right back to the crotch while he was pitching and go to the ER, which was just across the street. That's not a joke. But it was really fun. But what stands out to me, what's funny, is my memory of that time doesn't actually connect to the game. I actually don't know if we won or lost, because what caught me by surprise was all of the seniors and the juniors, the starters, the guys who would be the ones that would be their job to compete for the AA state championship. Their focus was they just had one thing in mind. It wasn't winning the game. It wasn't hitting the ball where it's pitched. It wasn't moving the runners. It was none of those things. Their only goal in life, it would seem, and here's the way they said it, was to hit the Marlboro man. Because here's a picture of the field. It's hard to find a good one. You can barely see it, but you can see the scoreboard in left center and then the Wendy's billboard. And in between there was the Marlboro man. A cowboy riding a horse with his rope and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. And that's all they talked about. Like it would have been their ultimate claim to fame if they could hit a home run over left field and hit the Marlboro man. And they didn't, as far as I know. But the modern day Marlboro man, I think, serves as a metaphor for us. And again, maybe this takes you down a road you don't care to go to. I think we have to. Because the notion of that billboard existing in Kendrick Field or any kind of public advertising today is actually laughable. And listen, if you smoke, the last thing I'm trying to do is make you feel bad about that. If tobacco is one of your things, that's really missing my point if you fixate on that. But what we can say is in the last 20 years or so, we as a culture have dealt with what we've come to call big tobacco. And ultimately what we've recognized was that big tobacco, they had their own kids and they didn't let them use the product. And they purposely targeted our kids. Many of you were among them. I smoked for 5 years in high school. And what we've quickly learned about them and what we finally dealt with in the last 20 years was this realization that they knew what they were selling us was anti-human. It was detrimental to what it would mean to be a healthy 15-year-old, but they didn't care because they made millions. I'm calling in my head for months, I've been calling this message the modern day Marlboro man, and that's why I start with don't always take this fear-based tone, but I wonder if to really dig in and do the work that tech begs us to do, we have to begin to think in terms of the modern day Marlboro man. That perhaps when you're a grandparent or a great-grandparent or long gone, the conversation that'll be being had over our era is, I can't believe they thought they could give a 15-year-old a social media account and that would be healthy. I can't believe they thought that they could do that at work and it wouldn't be distracting. I can't believe they didn't think it would inhibit their connections with people and their creativity. I wonder if we've got to deal with the fact that maybe we have our own modern day Marlboro man. And that doesn't make it a bad thing, being very honest. I've been in this material for months and months, working on it personally, having lots of failure and some success. I still have an iPhone, I still use email. The end game isn't becoming Amish, and that's not a shot against Amish, I'm just saying that's not my end game. But to me, it requires that we ask a different kind of question. Like if we know that Steve Jobs' kids didn't get to have an iPad, if we know that many Silicon Valley execs today send their kids to tech-free schools, then at the very least, maybe we've got to turn the question and recognize they're not going to do it for us. We've got to do it for ourselves. My friend Fred, who was a gift to me in my early 20s, he used to have this line. He'd say, Adam, everything is either a tool or an idol. Everything. And he was particularly passionate. He was really passionate about his stuff. He was a big recreationalist, and he had this passion that if I own it and I'm not willing to lend it to somebody else, then that's unhealthy. And that's, you can come to your own conclusions. That was his deal. And one of his examples that really stood out to me was he was a fly fisherman. He had a drift boat. And just so you know, I'm not positioning for your drift boat because I don't fish. Fish laugh at me. I do other things. But he had a drift boat, and the word was out. His circle, his community, he was a young life guy, people in his life, they could borrow his boat and take students, take friends, take their family fishing. And so one day, he and his family went to hook up to the boat. They pulled it the couple hours they were going to go fishing. And when they went to launch the boat, he looked in and he realized he was missing one of his oars. There was one nice wooden oar, but only one. And of course, he was committed, so he's got to do it anyway. And then he looked and he realized, no, there actually are two oars, but the second one's made of metal. It was actually like a street sign pole, or some kind of a pole with, I think he said it was a stop sign with baling wire tying the thing to the end of the pole. So somebody had lost his oar and graciously replaced it. So he was committed. He had to do his fishing thing. He took his family. They were in the river. They were halfway through the day. There was a moment of excitement. He let go of the oars. Normally that wouldn't be a big deal, but when one of them's made of steel, of course what happened is it fell in the water and didn't stop falling until it hit the bottom of the river. Then he was literally up a creek without a paddle. And so he navigated with his way down the river, taking the slower channels and all of that stuff. And I remember him saying that when it came time to take the boat out, that was where it got particularly challenging. In fact, what he had to do was jump into the river and then use the boat like a kickboard and steer it to where you would take it out. And he said by the time he got the thing on the trailer, he got a standing ovation from the people around who had watched him do this. To which you go like, well, just throw him a paddle. But it brings us back to this thing. What if the conversation, and we're just framing it this morning, I'm really excited for this month, but what if the conversation is one about at what point is your tech complementing the divine breath within you? At what point does it complement your creativity, your vocation, your desire for a relationship? And at what point is it actually taking? My friend Stan Simmons, who will be here in early March to speak, he used to say, sin, this is the way he would say it, it takes you further than you want to go, costs you more than you want to pay, and keeps you longer than you want to stay. And I wonder, well, that might be a little uncomfortable for you. Maybe that goes too far. If that's the way that we really have to start thinking about tech, where's the healthy balance within this conversation? Just this week, I was preparing, on Tuesday morning, I was preparing this message, and series intros are frankly the most fun because you got all this content and you're just kind of opening up the funnel and speaking to all this tension. So I was just in my office, like on the whiteboard, doing my mind map thing, and I was about 45 minutes in, and like out of nowhere, I had this thought of, I wonder if I've sold anything on eBay since I got to work. And the context there is, over the last several years, I've kind of fallen into selling different stuff on eBay, and we funded a couple of vacations and some bike stuff with it. And so over the weekend, I'd had time to list a few things, and some things sold. And so all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I had this thought. But of course, I'm writing a message on this, so I can't possibly look. So as I was patting myself on the back for not taking the distraction, my phone went off. And eBay has this incredibly addictive sound. It's just the sound of a cash register, cha-ching, whenever you sell something. And I'm not kidding. Before I realized what had just happened, after I'm like patting myself on the back with one hand and looking at my phone with the other and learning that I just sold a corkscrew for $29.99. I think the question that we have to begin to ask is, at what point do we have to take charge? You know, Cal Newport, who I've mentioned a little bit, his book, he asked the question this way. He says, go ahead to that next slide. What if the key to thriving in our high-tech world is learning to spend much less time using technology? If you read his other work, he actually says, your most competitive advantage in business, in school, in life, your most competitive advantage right now is to not be addicted because everybody else is. But what he does, the bigger picture of what Cal Newport does, and I just have to warn you here because it's a bit intense. What he argues is you and I, we can't incrementalize ourselves. He frankly is more prone to liken you and I to an alcoholic who isn't going to, on their own, without outside intervention, do this better. In fact, here's a quote directly from his book, and I just think it's worth at least sitting with his argument for a minute. Go ahead to that next slide. He says, but as is becoming increasingly clear to those who have attempted these types of minor corrections, willpower, tips, and vague resolutions are not sufficient by themselves to tame the ability of new technologies to invade your cognitive landscape. The addictiveness of their design and the strength of the cultural pressure supporting them are too strong for an ad hoc approach to succeed. So, here's my commitment to you. What we're not going to do for the rest of February is rail on this. But to be honest with what his argument is, here's really what it is. We're going to actually kind of invite you to do the opposite. That's what I did for months after I read this. So please don't think you're going to come here and you're going to hear this. But here's ultimately what he's saying. He's saying that getting rescued from this requires what he calls a 30-day detox. And he's very intentionally using like alcohol-type metaphor there. Because what he is saying is so here's how this works. And if you read his book or listen to his stuff, you'll get more information. But essentially what he's saying is you define how do you have to use technology to keep your job or to do school? Like there's certain things, you probably don't have the luxury of just not answering email for the next 30 days. The question is, do you have the luxury of not answering email at 8 o'clock at night? So what he's saying is, you define how you have to use tech for your job, for school, and then nothing else. Cold turkey. And his point is, you have to experience essentially the half-life of the addiction to a phone. That you'll move towards depressed, and then very quickly super bored. But his point is, much like that we know from recovery types of situations, eventually when the half-life, if you will, starts to kind of do its thing, it's like suddenly you start to ask questions like, what else do I want to do with my life? What else do I want to do with my time? What else am I interested in? Who could I actually go meet with personally? And I'm telling you, I did one of these 30-day things, and your capacity for people and for projects and for hobbies, it goes up exponentially. Now, I'm not going to rail on that for the next 30 days. In fact, I loved this stuff, wanted to do a series, couldn't figure out how, and then a friend of mine told me that a friend of many of yours, Scott and Missy, had done the detox thing. And so I beelined them to him in the lobby. We're going to actually have them up here next week and just talk a little bit about some of their hacks as just an intro to the message next week. And Missy said it so well. She said, Adam, here's what we experienced. She said, you know how Dave Ramsey, you know how he makes you angry at creditors? Because he exposes the fact that you didn't become $10,000 into credit card debt because you're bad at math or because you're a bad person. You were manipulated into it. Like the day you turned 18, stuff started showing up in your mailbox. He exposes that this happened intentionally. And she said that's what happened to us in the detox, is your eyes are awakened to the fact that millions and billions of dollars are spent to get you to that very place. So if you're anything like me, you'll be like, I can just kind of incrementalize my way to that, and that's great. And maybe 6 months later, you go, hey, maybe I'll do the detox thing. We are going to, the only time we're going to talk about it with any significance, again, is at the end of the month when the series is over. We'll invite you if you want to do one of these as a group. We did a pilot thing this last November. If you want to do one, I think it'd be really fun to start one on March 13th and then end on Easter Sunday on April 12th. So just wanted to, give you the assurance, you're not going to show up every Sunday and we're going to talk about the diet that you're not interested in. We can do other things. No offense if you're on the diet. There's a guy, Austin Kleon, and he says it well. My friend James bought me his book. I'd read his book, Steal Like an Artist, which is where I felt very invigorated in my gift of plagiarism. And now he's got one called Show Your Work. And in there, so he's a writer and an artist. He does this really unique art where he takes a newspaper and blacks out all the words except for a few and does this aesthetically pleasing and yet built-in kind of poetry thing. He also writes books. And in there, one of the things he said is, I had to come to the realization that over time, I had become an amateur artist and writer and a professional email answerer. And he said what I had to do was begin to do the work to flip the script and to once again become a professional artist and an amateur answerer of email. Another lens that you can look this thing through is the attention economy. I don't know if you're familiar with this phrase or if you did some marketing in college. This was new to me. Cal Newport talks a lot about it. But the story of attention economy begins in the 1830s when a guy named Benjamin Day started a newspaper called the New York Sun. It was a penny newspaper. It did what lots of newspapers do. You sell a little bit of advertising, a little bit of news, and you sell it to people for a penny. But he had this innovative idea. His idea was to change his perspective. That rather than seeing the product that he was selling as the news, he decided he would see the product he was selling as people's attention. And rather than seeing his customer as the person who buys his newspaper, he decided that he was going to start seeing the customer as his advertisers were his customer. And so it's an internal switch. It didn't necessarily change a lot of what he did initially, but the idea was, I'm going to sell the news, but really what I'm doing is selling people's attention. And people are going to buy it, but really my customer is going to be the advertisers. Now, that's not immoral, nor is it immoral for the advertisers to take advantage of that. But it does, I think, beg the question, like today when you watch the Super Bowl, and listen, I'm going to watch the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes is going to be up by 40 by halftime, I think. Whatever, I'm a Bronco fan, good for him. But I think here's the question, and maybe just to put it in present context. As you watch the Super Bowl, what's the product? Is it football, or is it Budweiser and Coors Light and Doritos and Pepsi and Coca-Cola. And listen, I like the commercials too. I'm not saying bad, just kind of naming it for what it is. And are you, the person who, oh, by the way, hasn't paid them a cent to watch the Super Bowl, are you their customer? Or is their customer Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Doritos, so on and so forth? And what this would all mean is, what if what tech has become masterful at is this idea of the attention economy? Another guy that's worth listening to is a guy named Tristan Harris. I've got a video for you of him.
60 Minutes, rewind.
Have you ever wondered if all those people you see staring intently at their smartphones nearly everywhere and at all times are addicted to them? According to a former Google product manager you're about to hear from, Silicon Valley is engineering your phone, apps, and social media to get you hooked. He's one of the few tech insiders to publicly acknowledge that the companies responsible for programming your phones are working hard to get you and your family to feel the need to check in constantly. Some programmers call it brain hacking, and the tech world would probably prefer you didn't hear about it. But Tristan Harris openly questions the long-term consequences of it all, and we think it's worth putting down your phone to listen.
This thing is a slot machine.
How's that a slot machine?
Well, every time I check my phone, I'm playing the slot machine to see what did I get. This is one way to hijack people's minds and create a habit, to form a habit. What you do is you make it so when someone pulls a lever, sometimes they get a reward, an exciting reward. And it turns out that this design technique can be embedded inside of all these products.
The rewards Harris is talking about are a big part of what makes smartphones so appealing. The chance of getting likes on Facebook and Instagram, cute emojis in text messages, and new followers on Twitter.
There's a whole playbook of techniques that get used to get you using the product for as long as possible.
Yeah, what kind of techniques are used?
So Snapchat's the most popular messaging service for teenagers, and they invented this feature called Streaks, which shows the number of days in a row that you've sent a message back and forth with someone. So now you can say, well, what's the big deal here? Well, the problem is that kids feel like, well, now I don't want to lose my streak. But it turns out that kids actually, when they go on vacation, are so stressed about their streak that they actually give their password to like 5 other kids to keep their streaks going on their behalf. And so you could ask, when these features are being designed, are they designed to most help people live their life? Or are they being designed because they're best at hooking people into using the product?
Is Silicon Valley programming apps, or are they programming people?
Inadvertently, whether they want to or not, they're shaping the thoughts and feelings and actions of people. They are programming people. There's always this narrative that technology is neutral and it's up to us to choose how we use it. This is just not true.
Technology is not neutral.
It's not neutral. They want you to use it in particular ways and for long periods of time because that's how they make their money.
It's rare for a tech insider to be so blunt, but Tristan Harris believes someone needs to be. A few years ago, he was living the Silicon Valley dream. He dropped out of a master's program at Stanford University to start a software company. 4 years later, Google bought him out and hired him as a product manager. It was while working there, he started to feel overwhelmed.
Honestly, I was just bombarded in email and calendar invitations and just the overload of what it's like to work at a place like Google. I was asking, when is all of this adding up to like an actual benefit to my life? And I ended up making this presentation. It was kind of a manifesto. And it basically said, look, never before in history have a handful of people at a handful of technology companies shaped how 1 billion people think and feel every day with the choices they make about these screens.
So here's a challenge. When you get to the Super Bowl party, leave your phone in the car because you're not hooked, right? And here I did it. I do it too. Like, well, my wife's in Ecuador. The boys are spread all over town. Like, how long did it take you to get a list of 6 reasons why you can't possibly do that? And part of what Newport exposes is this idea that we get caught in a cycle. And the cycle looks something like this. Like, I don't have any hobbies or interests, and therefore when I have 5 minutes, I look at my phone. But because we look at our phone, we don't have any hobbies or interests, and it creates this self-perpetuating cycle. I have a friend who's an electrician who said one of the most common requests they get right now is an outlet next to the toilet. Now, sorry if I'm judging you because you've got one and you love it, but it's a little crazy. Listen to Philippians, because there's this question of, okay, where's God? And we're going to do a lot more God work in the coming weeks. But listen to Paul. Rejoice in the Lord always, and again I'll say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. Do not worry about anything. Now, let's just pause there for a second. Interesting, isn't it, to know that worry isn't a new thing, it's a human thing? That other cultures on other continents with other situations and other opportunities and other challenges still experience this. And yet if you look into the research, they'll say it's at epidemic levels today. Cal Newport's interview on EntreLeadership, I highly, highly recommend it. And he goes so far as to say, while we cannot scientifically prove that teenage suicide rates are connected directly to the iPhone, it's a really strong correlation. In fact, he's actually an optimist. He's of the opinion that the metrics are so bad and it's so clearly so unhealthy that 10 years from now, he thinks it's going to self-correct, that we just, like giving your kid a social media account on a phone would be like handing him a pack of Marlboros. He's just convinced it's not going to happen. Worry. Think of it like this. You maybe know this, but like your brain's designed for rest. I know that. You know that. I struggle with anxiety. Maybe you do. Here's one of the metaphors that I learned along the way. That what if your brain is designed for rest? And what if the constant stimulation we give it is akin to this morning when you started your car and you drove to church, when you put it in park upon arrival, rather than turn it off, you reach back in the back seat and grab a cinder block and put it on the accelerator. And you come in and you go to church, and then you leave here and you go to Winco along with 10 million people. And when you get to Winco, you put it in park and you put the gas pedal, the block on the accelerator. And then when you get to the party or when you get home, you put it in park and you don't turn it off. And then when it's time to go to bed or you get home from the party, the same thing. You just leave it on the front curb with the RPMs at about 7,000. And your neighbors hate you because you're that person with the loud car. Now, you would know that car is not going to last long. And when you dig into the science of this, that's the parallel they're drawing, that our brains are designed to escape from stimulation, and yet the attention economy would love for them to not do that. So worry's not a new thing, but listen to Paul, and listen particularly to what Paul is promising here. But in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. So this is a conversation about prayer, but watch this. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So question, what is Paul selling? Like, what are his wares, if you will? What's he promising? What's he offering? What's he offering? Peace, emotional, spiritual. I think important to recognize that Philippians is a letter written to some people who were going through hell. Their circumstances were horrendous, and his solution to them isn't, you've got to have ideal circumstances. His solution is what? What's the means to get to peace? He's arguing for what? Your attention. What if to be human is to have the divine breath? What if to be human is to uniquely have the divine breath? And what if the tech companies are brilliant? Because while the rest of us are talking about oil and platinum and other commodities, what if they understand that the most valuable, the most powerful commodity on the planet is your attention? Dallas Willard says the most important thing about you is your mind, and the most important thing about your mind is what it's fixed upon. The psalmist says, God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing to you, O God, my rock and my Redeemer. Paul says it this way, finally, beloved. Notice, whether or not God loves you, that you can look at your iPhone all you want. God loves you. That's not at stake. This is your experience of life. Finally, my beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about such things. What's Paul's end game? Is it that you would become a religious monk completely detached from everyday life? Or is his end game that you are an image bearer of the holy, that you are made in God's image, that God started things in a garden and then says, hey, I can't wait till we get to the city That this God wants human creativity. This God wants things to move forward. This guy wants to see trails and technology and things move forward. This God loves that, and what's the means of getting it there? Boredom? Imagination? What you think about when there's nothing else to do? Maybe this is ultimately a conversation that this is the way I've been saying it to myself for a bit now. Is at the end of the day, like, can I look God in the eye and be proud of what I gave my attention to today? Not in this like lustful, pure thing. That's a separate conversation. And that's not actually even what I mean. I mean in this, what did I give my energy to? So, as we move out and into next week, just a few things that maybe will help, because I realize that there's a bit of a fire hose here. So a few maybe actionable steps that might be helpful to you. One, watch, listen. I know that's ironic, but I think that makes the point of use it for your end, not its. Watch and listen to everything you can get your hands on from Cal Newport. He's a genius thinker and has a lot of research on this. The other, Tristan Harris, the last guy we just watched in the video, also a very creative thinker and a very brilliant man. But I got to warn you, part of his stuff gets a little freaky because he's actually convinced that we're talking about the end game of humanity as we know it. Like, there's a video you can find where he's talking to the UN and going, I know you guys are focused on educating the world, but I'm here to tell you it's the third world, and I know that's not the best word, but it's the under-resourced world that's watching YouTube more than anybody else. And if we don't get this thing right, the whole thing's in trouble. 3, I think reading Digital Minimalism is well worth your while. Sorry, I dropped the ball there. 4th, and I'm just going to challenge you, if you're a Christ follower, maybe you haven't done this for a long time. Dallas Willard calls it the most important spiritual discipline that there is, maybe to memorize Philippians 4 through 8. Because then rather than plugging in, you can actually recite something, play a script in your head. And then lastly, there are these book groups, and if you're interested in those, there's sign-up sheets out there as well. Finally, I want to pray, but I just want to say one more thing. And I wish someone would have said this to me. I've made more mistakes than done well. But parents, be careful, because it's really easy to walk out of here with a diatribe and a bunch of kind of rather blunt decisions. But the reality is you've probably modeled horribly. If you haven't, congratulations. But I guess my challenge would be, like, do your own work. Like, get your own balance before you start preaching it and enacting it and legislating it, because, again, chances are high that most of the ways that they're using technology poorly have been modeled to them by you. And so I really think the way of Jesus is do your own work, model it, and trust that things will come into alignment over time. And ultimately, I want to pray for you as students. The challenges in front of you on this are nothing like what we faced when we were in school. And I want to pray for you as parents. God, thanks. Thanks, Lord, that you love creation, you love creativity, you love organizations even like Google, I think. But God, you also make us responsible people who are oftentimes have to make very important and like little tiny decisions that don't seem like much, but in the end, our life is kind of defined by them. God, we love you. Amen.
If you would like to learn more about Narrate Church, find us at narratechurch.org or look us up on Facebook and Instagram.